Welcome. I'm Dr. Bill Osmunson. I've been a dentist for 46 years, recently retired last year. And for 25 years, I promoted water fluoridation. I'm going to go over this fairly fast. So hang on, and you can stop it at any time to read more in details here. Fluoride or fluoridation, the FDA says do not swallow. The court says it's an unreasonable risk. The EPA union says it's borders on a criminal act. And the Florida Surgeon General says public health is malpractice, which it's probably true, although I don't know that there's malpractice for public health. And also the Washington Board of Pharmacy says that it's a legend drug. Idaho says it's a drug. We know it's a drug. What changed my mind on fluoridation? Because I was confident that I could see the benefit in patients' mouths. Freedom changed my mind. That was the first thing. My patients said, "What do you think of freedom?" I believe in freedom. And also there are other sources of fluoride to choose if you want to swallow it. Give us freedom from too much fluoride because we're getting too much. Fluoridation is not like a vaccine where we desire herd immunity. Dental caries are neither highly contagious nor highly lethal. In public health, they'll teach us that, yes, public health has police powers, and they can require, to protect the public health, that a person be quarantined or get a vaccine or get treatment or something, because we want to protect the public health. That's important, but that's not what's happening with fluoridation. Freedom and science changed my mind. The FDA warning, do not swallow, because fluoride is a drug. Topical is approved. Do not swallow. Ingested is unapproved. Fluoridation would be banned if approval is attempted, is what the FDA said to the Washington State Board of Health when they said, well, we'd like to get it approved. They said, no, it'd be a banned if you tried. What about banned is so hard to understand? The U.S. District Court, fluoridation is an unreasonable risk. Now, I'm going over this as a summary, and then I'll go in more details later. The National Toxicology Program, fluoride is a developmental neurotoxin. The EPA scientists say it's highly toxic, not significantly effective, and borders on a criminal behavior by the part of governments. It's a contaminant, and they have no uncertainty factor or interspecies variation or synergistic activity with other toxins. Have the same amount of other toxins, etc. Fluoridation, it's not cost effective if you include the cost of treating harm, or if you include the cost of any other adverse effect. Benefit, there are no randomized controlled trials. We need to get into that. No known mechanism of action. 7, dosage, it's too much. 8, most developed countries say no to fluoridation. I'll try to cover those quickly. What is water fluoridation? Well, it's the addition of fluoride to water. There are some places that have too much fluoride. I'm not covering that. I'm just covering the addition, the choice of adding more. Hexafluorosilicic acid, it's not a naturally occurring contaminant, is a byproduct. Basically, the wet scrubbing system of the phosphate fertilizer industry is where most of it comes from, and some comes from China. It's not pharmaceutical grade. Industrial grade hexafluorosilicic acid, it's not pharmaceutical grade, contains a bunch of chemicals. You can look at them all, read them. Sometimes it contains them, sometimes it doesn't. We do know that lead blood levels increase in fluoridated communities. You can read this if you are interested. The Food and Drug Administration, Center for Drug Evaluation Research, is our number one area. Congress defined drugs as articles intended for use in the prevention of disease, also cure and mitigation and treatment, but also prevention of disease. The intent of use determines regulatory or oversight, not whether it is natural or artificial, regardless of concentration or efficacy. According to the Washington Board of Pharmacy, fluoride is a legend drug, means it requires a doctor's prescription. The FDA testified to Congress in 2001 that fluoride is a drug. The EPA Water Law Office responded to our question of whether the EPA was responsible or the FDA was responsible for fluoridation, and the Safe Drinking Water Act prohibits the EPA from adding anything to water with the intent to treat humans. And so it would be wrong for the EPA to say we're going to add fluoride to the water for reducing dental caries, because that's not their job. And their response was that the FDA remains responsible for regulating the addition of drugs to water supply for healthcare purposes. And the EPA considers the addition of fluoride to be a drug. For efficacy, unknown. For safety, do not swallow. In 1975, the FDA wrote to 35 drug companies and said, there's no substantial evidence of drug effectiveness as prescribed, recommended, or suggested in its labeling. Marketing is in violation of the new drug provisions of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Therefore, requested that marketing of these products be discontinued. It's an unapproved drug. The Washington state law defines a poison as arsenic, cyanide, strychnine, or any other substance designated by the State Board of Pharmacy, which when introduced into the human body in quantities of 60 grains or less, causes violent sickness or death. 60 grains. What's that? I go in milligrams. So 60 grains equals 3,889 milligrams. 15 milligrams of sodium fluoride will likely cause death in a child, according to Whitford. And 5 milligrams per kilogram sodium fluoride is likely lethal for an adult. So is 15 less than 3,889? Obviously. Is a 100 kilogram man of 500 milligrams less than 3,889? Again, obviously. I went to the Board of Pharmacy and I said, okay, is fluoride a poison? Or is it, as a law provides an exemption, if it is regulated as a prescription or as a drug? And the Board of Pharmacy determined that fluoride is a drug. On the toothpaste tube, you'll see it says drug facts. Well, we know it's a drug because the intent of use makes it a drug. And it says do not swallow. Very clear. Simple 3 words, not difficult to understand. Use a pea-size amount. In other words, do not swallow that pea-size amount. Sometimes they're using a rice size that they talk about. Now on that toothpaste brush, on the toothbrush, there's toothpaste. That size of pea size is twice the size that the FDA has considered a problem. Keep out of reach of children under 6 years of age. The higher concentration ones actually say 12 years of age. What the FDA is concerned about is a pea size of toothpaste which contains a 1/4 milligram of fluoride, half the amount that's on the toothbrush there. That's the same as a glass of fluoridated water. About 11 ounces of water contains about a 1/4 milligram of fluoride. Now, one of the problems that we dentists have, and those promoting fluoridation have, is they don't understand research well. There's expert opinion at the very bottom, and that is your doctor who looks in your mouth and says, I think this or this or this. That's my expert opinion. Now, when we do research, we do a case series or case reports and observational studies with comparison groups, non-randomized controlled trials, randomized controlled trials, and if we have a bunch of randomized controlled trials, then we can do systematic reviews. Well, with water fluoridation, the best quality of study we have is observational studies. And this is a real problem because, let me use an example here. For 3,000 years, there was a treatment that was used for people. It was called bloodletting, where the veins were sliced and blood was let to drip down the arm. That's like a barber pole. And we were letting the bad humors out of the person. And, it lasted for many thousands of years. Why? Because we professionals and the clergy said it helps. How did we know that it helped? With observational studies. We observed the patient got better. Wow, that's cool. They got better. So obviously it was our treatment that worked. And we were all excited about that. And it kept going for years, thousands of years. And of course, some died. Well, that's God's will. So either it was working or they died because God didn't want them to live. That's an observational study. That's the best we have on fluoridation. That's one of the reasons that the FDA says, we won't approve it. Now, there are no randomized controlled trials. And there is one randomized controlled trial of supplements, fluoride supplement, which is a controlled amount, voluntary taken, higher quality of product. And that one randomized controlled trial did not report any benefit, statistical benefit. And there are no systematic reviews. So what we're dealing with is a lot of speculation of observational studies, which is low quality. Now, the FDA says the evidence is incomplete, partly because there are no randomized controlled trials. There are many limitations to the observation of dental caries and fluoridation. There are three big ones, and I'm going to cover. There's diet, and there's all kinds of other things, difficulty in diagnosis, many other things. But the three that I want you to really focus on is there's not one study that corrects for unknown confounding factors. And you say, well, yeah, the unknown is the unknown. We don't really deal with that. Very important that we do. Not one prospective randomized controlled trial. We covered that briefly. And socioeconomic status, often not included. And that was my problem. When I looked in patients' mouth, I really was looking at socioeconomics rather than fluoridation, but I gave fluoride the credit. Manufacturers of unapproved drugs are usually fully aware that their drugs are marketed illegally. Now, the FDA deals with the manufacturer, the final manufacturer. Yet they continue to circumvent the law and put consumers' health at risk. Now, who's the final manufacturer of fluoridated water? That would be the city, for example, or the water purveyor. And so the FDA would need to send them a letter and say, you guys, it's not approved. And the FDA doesn't want to come down and regulate those poor cities, and so they've done nothing. Washington law says, quote, it shall be unlawful for any person to sell, deliver, or possess any legend drug except upon the order or prescription of a physician. Okay, the board also said that it's a legend drug and it needs a physician's prescription. There is no physician that is overseeing fluoridation as for you as a patient. So we've got real problems there. No legal oversight by a physician. Number two, the U.S. District Court. In sworn deposition under threat of perjury, neither the National Sanitation Foundation, the Food and Drug Administration, Center for Disease Control, Environmental Protection Agency, nor three major fluoride manufacturers had a single safety study for developmental neurotoxicity. Fluoridation is an unreasonable risk, according to the court. Quote, plaintiffs have proven by a preponderance of the evidence that water fluoridation at the level of 0.7 milligrams per liter, the prescribed optimal level of fluoridation in the United States, presents an unreasonable risk of injury. That's the amount that the judge had to determine if it was unreasonable according to the Toxic Substance Control Act. And he said, yes, it's unreasonable to health or the environment without consideration of costs or other non-risk factors. including an unreasonable risk to a potentially exposed or susceptible subpopulation under the conditions of use. Okay, that's pretty strong, and it is unapproved, and it is unreasonable risk, according to the court. The court continues on page 75. The pooled benchmark dose analysis concluded that a 1-point drop in IQ of a child is to be expected for each quarter milligram of fluoride in a pregnant mother's urine. This is highly concerning because maternal urinary fluoride levels for pregnant mothers in the United States range from about 0.8 to about 1.9 milligrams per liter, depending upon the degree of exposure. Not only is there insufficient margin between the hazard level and these exposure levels, for many the exposure levels exceeds the hazard level of a quarter milligram. Fluoride presents a risk of decrease in IQ for such offspring, ranging from almost 3 to almost 7 points. Okay, that's mother's urine. But we need to remember that urine and fluoridated water concentrations are roughly comparable on a population basis. In other words, an individual may not have that tie as close. Urine in a mother's kidneys may be much higher based on their water consumption, partly because they may be swallowing toothpaste or they may eat foods that are higher in fluoride. But on a population basis, they're fairly reasonably compared because about half the fluoride going into a mother is from water and about half comes from other sources. And about half the fluoride is excreted and about half of it is maintained in the bones. So it's roughly comparable. Assume 220 million people on community water fluoridation in the United States. That's a little over 11 million mothers-to-be on drinking fluoridated water. Well, maybe half of them are drinking the fluoridated water and half of them drinking bottled water. But certainly there's millions of pregnant mothers, and our concern is for their babies and lower IQ. The graphs below illustrate the serious effect of 5 IQ loss. For example, if we look at the bell curve, then we assume 260 million people are on fluoridated water, which is a little bit high. We have 6 million mentally retarded. In other words, that bell curve slides over when we get lower IQ, which increases the mentally retarded to about 9.4 million. So it's better than 50% increase in the mentally retarded when we have 5 IQ loss. It also is a problem for the gifted, which is about a little over 50% decrease in the gifted. Well, when we lose IQ and we're at the low end of IQ, we see that there's more dropouts from high school. We see that there's more unemployed. They can't hold down a job as well. We see increased incarceration because these people get frustrated. They cannot compete well in society. They don't do as well. They don't have as much money. They aren't being paid as well, and they get frustrated, and so they start stealing or committing crimes because they want to do as well as others. And the parents of these are suffering also. There's increased divorce, increased special education. And then, of course, if we looked at the gifted, there's a decrease in the inventors, critical thinkers, artists, excellence. So it hurts. Both ends of the scale are easier to measure than the middle, where probably you and I are located. In court, a different court case, Doe versus Rumsfeld, you may remember that case, the court ruled even under emergency conditions of war, the government cannot force an individual to be medicated with a substance which has not been specifically approved for the purpose and manner it is intended. Fluoridation is an unapproved drug. Courts shouldn't be, governments can't do that according to the courts. Number 3, National Toxicology Program, developmental neurotoxin, measured with lower IQ. Okay. In 2015, I and others nominated fluoride to the National Toxicology Program. Well, I did cancer, and I did thyroid, and I did brain developmental neurotoxicity, and they accepted the neurotoxicity. The draft report came out, and it reported a presumed developmental hazard. Well, actually, it didn't come out. HHS blocked the release, and the court ordered the release, and that's where we saw that it had a developmental neurotoxic hazard. There are 2 sections that they divided it into because they had several peer reviews trying to get consensus, but the fluoridation lobby was very truculent on this whole thing. One is the state of the science, and the other is meta-analysis. Reviewers generally focused on the clarity rather than disagreement with the conclusion. However, 2 decades ago, research reported that there was a 21% mental retardation rate when water was at 3.14. Well, fluoridation lobby said, of course, at higher levels, we know it's a toxin. But they didn't like to talk about the 3.4% increase at 0.37 parts per million of fluoride. But that's 25 years ago, sorry. So at the time, about 2005, when I started looking at fluoridation, what I did is I got lots of data from federal surveys, and I ranked the states, the 50 states, and ranked on these little dots coming on up here, the percentage of the whole population fluoridated in each state. And then I ranked for instance, mental retardation. And we can see that mental retardation actually increases by more than 100%. And that seemed a little bit wild, but really, there was also great variations in the states. So the data is, it's a red flag for sure. Not proof, but a red flag. Children's IQ, water fluoride levels in the NTP's graph East figure 17, we can see on the right-hand side that it, on the left, on the y-axis, it's 0.5, and then it goes to 0, 0, and then 0.5, and 1, and then 1.5, and then 2. That's the standardized mean difference. In other words, one standardized mean difference is 15 IQ points. And on the bottom we have water fluoride concentration milligrams per liter. And so if we look at the 0.7 at fluoridation, and if there were no other sources of fluoride, we could see that there was a decline. What concerns me the most is as we get lower and lower with the amount of fluoride in the water, we don't really quite get to 0 until it's 0 fluoride in the water. So there doesn't look like there's any safe level of fluoride in the water. And that's a huge concern for me. If we look at what the average person in the United States is getting roughly, we're looking at about, on the left-hand side, almost half a standard mean difference, which would be close to 7 IQ points loss. Some reviewers suggested that the monograph is not designed to be informative regarding decisions about fluoride concentrations for water fluoridation. However, if we only look at water fluoridation, that may be true, but this is something that we're looking at the total fluoride concentration, and the NTP scientists disagreed, confirming they were considering total fluoride exposure. Mean consumption for the average person is about 1 liter per day, or just slightly less according to EPA. Pregnant moms are recommended to drink about 2.3 liters per day. So 1 liter per day at 0.7 would be about 0.7 milligrams. 2.3 liters per day would be over 1.5 milligrams per liter. And so if we, as far as water, at 1 liter. So we need to make sure we understand the dosage and concentration are different issues. Some drink 10 liters per day, and so this would be even more. Water fluoridation is not dosage controlled. 9 mother-child neurotoxicity studies were used, 8 reporting neurotoxicity at low concentrations. There's one outlier out of Spain, and it showed an increase of 15 IQ points for every 1 milligram per gram increase of mother's urinary fluoride creatinine for boys, but not girls. An impossible boost to IQ. Has never been found for any other chemical nutrient diet or study. Just think, if somebody came to you with an elixir, a miracle drug that would increase your child's IQ by 15 points, how much would you pay for that? I mean, that'd be amazing to be able to increase your child's IQ by 15 points. Absolutely stunning. But it gets worse. If you actually correct for the problems in the study, it actually comes out to a 38 IQ point increase. If this were true, most boys would be gifted. Geniuses in fluoridated communities would have few, if any, boys in special education classes. Well, go to your special education class and see. Well, I guess you can't get in anymore. But there's boys and girls. And there are often more boys than girls. But this study would say that that's not true. Of the 72 human studies used by the NTP to make their judgment, no other study showed an IQ increase. None. That was the only study. The experts in court suggest the laboratory work should be redone. However, the fluoridation lobby presents this study to raise doubt. Just maybe it's not a problem. It's the same type of tactic that the tobacco companies used back in the 70s when I was going to school. Just maybe it doesn't cause lung cancer. I mean, just maybe, or heart disease, or these other diseases. We don't have proof yet. The fluoridation lobby is doing the same type of delay. So the question is, we can't do randomized controlled trials on safety. You just can't intentionally cause harm to people. But safety needs to be assured. We don't have to prove absolute certainty that it's harming before we start saying maybe we shouldn't force people to have this drug. Research has remained consistent since the NTP report. 0.5 milligram increase in fluoride intake from infant formula corresponded to an 8.8 decrement in performance IQ and a 4.4 full scale IQ point loss among preschool children who were formula fed in the first 6 months of life for each 0.5 milligram per liter increase in water fluoride concentrations. The studies are really reasonably consistent. Well, I was interested, IQ is just one way of measuring. So what I did is I said, okay, let's look at this thing. Preliminary studies, miscarriage, premature birth, infant mortality. There's got to be other ways you can measure the effects of fluoride to the fetus and infant. I took 12 countries, compared based on individual GDP, gross domestic product, reported by the CIA. The average deaths in the 6 predominantly fluoridated countries with similar socioeconomics as the 6 countries with the least fluoridated, and we see that there is an increase in deaths per 100 live births within the first year of birth. So we need to do more studies there. That's not proof. We need to do more studies, but it is a red flag. Now let's look at the EPA. Environmental Protection Agency scientists, their bosses, politically appointed bosses, promoted fluoridation, protected fluoridation as a protected pollutant. EPA scientists say no to fluoridation. In summary, we hold that fluoridation is an unreasonable risk. That is, the toxicity of fluoride is so great and the purported benefits associated with it are so small. I read that the first time and I said, what in the world? Benefits are so small? I know it's beneficial. Don't give me that. Why are they saying it? Now, these are good scientists. So I go, well, I need to look more. If there are any at all benefits, if there are any at all, that requiring every man, woman, and child in America to ingest it borders on criminal behavior on the part of governments. That's a pretty strong statement by the scientists at the EPA. The NRC 2006 report was unanimous that the maximum contaminant level goal was too high for fluoride in the water based on numerous different problems, and these are a few that are listed there: tooth damage, arthritis, bone cancer, bone fractures, thyroid problems, kidney damage, reproductive problems, lower IQ, allergies, gastrointestinal disorders, etc. So this is a real concern for fluoride for the EPA. The EPA was told to do a exposure and relative source contribution analysis, and they published it in 2010. We can see the blue lines of the ages and the amount of fluoride that at each age is generally received. This is the 90th percentile. The mean is a little bit lower on the blue lines. Now, in order to make it only this bad, the EPA increased their reference dose. That's a black line that's there. So the children above the black line are getting too much. But they raised that black line by 33% on their reference dose, saying actually fluoride is safer than what we thought it was, the opposite of what the National Research Council instructed the EPA to do. And they also excluded infants below the age of 6 months. And they they did not include 10% of those drinking the most water. So by throwing out the people who are most at risk, the graph doesn't look quite as bad. The pineal gland. In 1997, Jennifer Luke found that the average of 9,000 parts per million calcium hydroxide apatite crystals in the pineal gland is up to 21,000 parts per million. Remember, toothpaste is at 1,200 to 1,500 parts per million, so the pineal gland can have a huge amount of fluoride in it. And there are no safety studies on that. Number 5, fluoridation is not cost effective. I just worked on this recently. This just came out of the CDC that I've copied, and it said 25% fewer cavities. And it says for every dollar spent, you get $20 return. Okay, most studies, most water districts and health departments say it's $38. The CDC has lowered it now to $20, which is more conservative. Assuming fluoridation has benefit, the caries averted in studies, if they look at all the costs of operational costs, is at $2,021, $8 per person per year. Cost to treat dental fluorosis, if people say that cosmetic damage is actually damage, was $126 per person per year. Now, the EPA and the fluoridation lobby will say, but no. Cosmetic damage is just a side effect. It's not really damage. And I use an illustration. If a gang member came and scratched their logo on the hood of my car will run just as well. But it is damage. Cosmetic damage is damage. 95% of children who have dental fluorosis in one study didn't like it and wanted it corrected. Lower wages from just 3 IQ points. There's approximately $500 per IQ point per year loss. Well, that ended up to be about $438 per person per year. So the only way that you can begin to have fluoridation as safe and cost effective is if you do not include any harm, no harm, just deny it, that it's perfectly safe for everyone, regardless of how much they're drinking in the water and regardless of how much they're getting from other sources, it's safe. And if you include any risks, it's not cost effective. Here's the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency did a study, and it's been updated in 2005 and then updated again in 2022. EPA research, quote, a mean cost for all consultants shows that the estimated costs for restoring function exceeds the cosmetic costs in all categories except the minimum latter costs. This represents a new finding and raises an issue that has been overlooked or ignored by previous investigators and their profession, that repair of the cosmetic discoloration was the only cost involved, or that repair of dysfunction was never considered to be a problem. Okay, there's more damage from functional damage than cosmetic damage. Of course, the EPA used 1 to 4 parts per million. Let's look at the electron microscope of dental fluorosis. We can see the pits, the cracking, the fissures in the enamel. It's not a nice, smooth surface. Here's a picture of dental fluorosis of a young person, 20s. He was raised on infant formula made with fluoridated water. We can see the pits, the chipping, incisal edges. That's what I call and diagnosed as severe dental fluorosis. This is not supposed to happen in fluoridated communities. Now, one of the ways that the fluoridation lobby will get around this is they'll say, aha, there was more that caused problems here than just the fluoridated water. Well, according to Mom, no, it was just the fluoridated water. But they want to say that fluoridated water, assuming that you don't get any fluoride from any other sources, is safe. But that's not real world. Real world is total fluoride exposure. And this may have been just fluoridated water, or he may have gotten it from toothpaste, although Mom said no. But anyway, he got severe dental fluorosis. What we're looking at is the fluoridation lobby will say the only known risk associated with the use of fluoride is mild enamel fluorosis, which is a cosmetic effect, no known health consequences. That's just not true. Here's what we want. We want to have nice smooth teeth, nice healthy teeth, and we want to have the color smooth and nice, and that's what it should be. This person was raised on no fluoridated water. It was a well water, and no fluoride swallowing, and mostly organic foods. Freedom to have a smile like this. Breastfed, no fluoridation, toothpaste not swallowed. Tony did a great job in treating this dental fluorosis. Roughly, my estimate is about $1,000 per tooth, lasting about 12 years on average, and that would be roughly $50,000 to $100,000 of damage that this fluoridation contributed to or caused. Now, delay in diagnosis resulting in what we call the fluoride bomb. That's a functional damage. And we can look at a picture here. Now, if this was taken in a school setting where they're doing a survey, there might be that first molar having some little pits in it. Yeah, that's probably, we need to clean those things out, find out how deep that goes. But a second molar in a dark classroom might be missed. It had been missed, obviously. I opened it up, had a look. Yep, we got some decay in there. By the time we cleaned out the decay, why, it was much bigger than was expected. The second molar actually had a lot more decay than the first molar. Cusp fractures. Well, could making the teeth harder make them more brittle? Yeah, could. And so I looked up studies on complete cusp fractures. And what we have is where there's no fluoride added to the water and it's low fluoride area, we have a little over 2% of the visits are for complete cusp fracture. That's an easy one to diagnose. I mean, that's a whole bunch of tooth is missing. In Oregon, there's 19% fluoridated, and that's about double the amount of complete cusp fractures coming in the dental office. And where we have most of the people fluoridated, it's about triple the number of complete cusp fractures. Now, we got to keep in mind here that that tooth is going to need at least to have a crown, maybe gum surgery also, and possibly a root canal, and if we've diagnosed it correctly. And The tooth may die later and need to have a root canal later and then have the crown replaced. But if the tooth does not recover from the root canal and the crown, then we get to do an extraction and then a bridge or implants. And then it needs to be redone about every 12, 15 years. It's huge amount of work, huge costs for patients and for the insurance companies who promote fluoridation. Number 6, fluoridation lacks significant benefit. That was the hardest one for me to accept. I was so certain fluoridation was helping my patients have better teeth. However, fluoride in drinking water works primarily after the teeth have erupted, especially when small amounts are maintained constantly in the mouth and coat the teeth throughout the day. So it's not swallowing the fluoride that systemically benefits, because the fluoride can't get through the tooth. There's no way for it to pass through the tooth. What concentration of topical fluoride has been found beneficial? We don't know yet, okay? Fluoride concentration increases with fluoridated water and or fluoride toothpaste, and increases with increased concentration. In other words, at 1,500, we add at 0.7. But at 1,500 parts per million to 5,000 parts per million, there is an increase in saliva fluoride concentration. But that's 5,000 parts per million. Most toothpaste is around 1,200 to 1,500 parts per million. This study is showing that if we just do more, it's going to increase that saliva fluoride concentration. However, normal serum fluoride is about 0.02 parts per million. And the concentration of fluoride in ductal saliva as secreted is about 0.016 parts per million in fluoridated areas, and about 0.006, or less than half that, in the non-fluoridated areas. So the question is, will that difference of about 0.01 increase in ductal saliva fluoride concentration have a cariogenic activity effect? Not likely. CDC ingestion of fluoride is not likely to reduce tooth decay. 1999. It is not CDC's task to determine what levels of fluoride in water are safe. Okay, we got some more there. I'll let you read it. CDC Division of Oral Health in their training program says systemic fluoride, or fluoride that is swallowed, affects the structure of teeth as they form beneath the gums during childhood. That's probably where things get more brittle. Systemic fluoride does not affect the fully formed tooth that have erupted from the gums. Fluoridation doesn't work like what we were taught originally. This is one of the saddest pictures you can have. As a dentist treating these infants, just so traumatic for the dentist and for the patient. These are pictures taken from the ADA. And I would take these children to the hospital and work with them. Man, that was terrible. And you know, if fluoridation was cost effective, in other words, if it was a break even on costs, I'd say, oh boy. And if it was safe, let's fluoridate, because I don't want to have these problems with these children. The poor kids don't understand why they have the problem. If you look at these teeth, though, a little closer, on all 3 pictures, the lower teeth are good. It's the upper teeth are not. So are we saying that fluoridation helped here? If so, then why did it just help the bottom teeth and not the top teeth? Well, fluoridation didn't help. These are early childhood caries, and it's not caused by a fluoride deficiency. It's caused by a bad diet, such as sleeping with a bottle of milk, juice, or soda. Most samples of mother's milk have no detectable fluoride. There's a mean of samples detected at 0.004 parts per million. Mother's milk does protect the infant, but mother's placenta does not. CDC graph I just got, 11/19/24. Took it off the CDC website. Prevalence of dental caries dropped from 1970s to the 2000. Wow, that is a great drop. Tremendous drop. Wonderful. We don't need nearly as many dentists if that's all they were doing. Mean DMFT, decayed, missing filled teeth, much lower. And that's wonderful again also. However, was it fluoride that caused that decline? When we compare World Health Organization of fluoridated, non-fluoridated countries or fluoridated salt, etc., they all decreased decay to similar low levels of prevalence. Here's another graph of similar data, only more current, and it shows non-fluoridated versus fluoridated communities all dropping down to very similar levels, whether you have fluoridation or you don't. This graph is very important for you to understand because decay rates declined before fluoridation, a huge amount. So what caused the decline before fluoridation? I mean, it wasn't fluoridation that caused that decline before fluoridation. We don't know. And so that unknown is never corrected in studies later. That unknown may be just causing the same decline in dental caries later as before, and fluoridation have no benefit. We don't know. So that's a real concern that the unknowns are not used in correction or corrected for in any studies. And a randomized controlled trial would help correct for that. Comparing 50 states, fluoridation does not improve dental health. This graph is one I did. It was published. Again, ranking the states based on their percentage of whole population fluoridated. And I ranked the good teeth and fluoridation based on socioeconomics. The pink line to the top dots show the good teeth for the high socioeconomics. And then the blue ones show the good teeth for the low socioeconomics. And all of a sudden the light bulb went on in my head and I said, oh, I've been comparing socioeconomics more than I have fluoridation. States, New York State, we can see there again, ranking the counties in New York State, we don't see an increase, a decrease in dental caries with our decay rates with fluoridation. Actually, it increases slightly the more fluoridation we have. A number of recent cessation studies show that stopping fluoridation does literally nothing to increase overall dental decay. Modern studies find difficulty in measuring the benefits of fluoridation. Not taking into account delayed tooth eruption makes early fluoridation studies overestimates. The fluoride effect on dental decay is simply delayed due to delay in the emergence of the teeth into the mouth. Well, if the tooth doesn't come in as soon, well, then the tooth is protected. I remember in the 70s, they said, well, this may be the main benefit of fluoride is that it protects the tooth under the gums longer, and then they don't get decay as soon. But then you need to change how you measure it. You need to find out how long the tooth has been in the mouth, which has not been done. Nearly all fluoride is absorbed. 50% is excreted in the urine, 99% retained in the bones. Half-life of fluoride is 20 years. So if you say, well, Mom, you're pregnant and you're going to drink bottled water to try to reduce the fluoride concentration getting to your fetus, what about the bones that are being resorbed to give the fetus calcium? They have high fluoride in it, and that fluoride is going to go into the fetus to some extent, and some excreted. But that's a real concern with a half-life taking so long. It could be really considered one of the forever chemicals. Our analysis shows no convincing effect of fluoride intake on caries development. Here's an interesting one, if you like to chuckle a little bit. ADA awarded Kentucky with 50-year award for 100% fluoridation in 2003, yet 42% were edentulous, no teeth at all. Number one in the USA. So they got an award, but it wasn't helping. With 1.6 to 4 parts per million fluoride in the water, 50% or more past the age of 24 have false teeth. That was 1944, Journal of American Dental Association. Connecticut, Detroit, Boston all report a crisis of dental decay. They've all been fluoridation. Here we go. Since April of 1999, I have publicly decried the addition of fluoride, especially hydrofluorosilicic acid, to drinking water for the purpose of preventing tooth decay. Another one by a Nobel Prize in Medicine 2000, Arvid Carlsson. I'm quite convinced that water fluoridation in a not too distant future will be consigned to medical history, and fewer fillings had been required in the non-fluoridated part of my district than the fluoridated part. So we don't get published data much where it doesn't fit public policy. Here's a graph, CDC 1999. At first blush, it looks like an increase in the percentage of people drinking fluoridated water has decreased the amount of decayed, missing, filled teeth. That's impressive, wonderful. But let's look at the data a little closer. 40% in 1967 fluoridated. It gets up to about 1990s somewhere. We have about 17% increase in the number of people fluoridated. Okay, let's think this through. 35 million more people, not targeted, but just became fluoridated somewhere in the United States. And that is supposed to have caused 200 million people to have a 70% decrease in decay. So 35 million people are added to the fluoridation, and that causes 70% decrease for 200 million people. It's just preposterous. It's impossible. If you could think it through, it's just not going to happen. Then we have one from Calgary. But if we look at the data before fluoridation stopped in Calgary, in 2005, we have data on the decay rate in Calgary and Edmonton. And we have it again in 2015, roughly, 14 and a half. Decay rates increased. There's no question about it. And for many years. Why? Well, we need to find out why it did. But fluoridation had no common cause with that. It was going up before and it was going up afterwards. But the stopping of fluoridation didn't increase the cavity rate. Although number 7, diagnose dosage, freedom to choose the amount of a drug. Many are ingesting too much fluoride, huge increases. National Health Assessment Nutrition Evaluation Survey showed in 2000 about 40% of children had dental fluorosis. When we look at it 12 years later, about 60% had dental fluorosis, or a huge increase. Now, a study, Journal American Dental Association, this graph was not in that journal. This is the data this is a graph made of the data from the JADA published research. We can see the red lines of the caries experience. Almost no difference with fluoridated water. But we can see that the blue line's going on up. As we increase with the water, we increase dental fluorosis. That's expected. But if there is a slight decline at 0.3 to 0.7, just a little bit more, and we get an increase. Now, is it possible that water fluoridation had benefit, but now we're getting too much, and so that's showing up as no more benefit because with an extra fluoride we get more decay? It's possible, but whatever it is, it's very slight difference. Foods have fluoride. Industry has fluoride. Drugs have fluoride. Anesthesia has fluoride. Vitamins, water, toothpaste, all these things have fluoride. Drugs, many different drugs have fluoride. You can stop, have a look at this if you want. Foods, especially if it's things like deboned, mechanically deboned versus hand deboned meats. For instance, pork, hand deboned, about 2 to 3 milligrams per kilogram. But if you mechanically debone it, you're going to grind up some of the bone in it, and that's going to, bone is high in fluoride, so you're going to get a lot more fluoride. Mother's milk is 175 times more than what we say is optimal. American Academy of Pediatrics back in 1998 said no prescription fluoride for infants and under 6 months of age, and only 1 cup of water 6 months to 3 years of age. That's not very much water. Okay, number 8, most developed countries have freedom And this is my last slide, but you can see here that Austria rejected, Belgium rejected, all these different countries have said no, Israel rejected, China doesn't have it. I mean, most developed countries do not. They have the similar rate of decay. So these are reasons why I no longer support fluoridation, and I'm highly opposed to it because I only covered a couple things of dental fluorosis and lower IQ, and there's cancer, and there's tons of research on the cancer and the thyroid damage and bone damage, even the teeth. If all that was the only risk was teeth, the cosmetic damage alone should stop fluoridation. When there's so easy to stop it by just turning off the pumps, so easy to get something from a different source if you wanted to. Public health has really lost credibility by forcing people to ingest fluoride. We've turned the decision making over to cities or public. You're having your neighbors medicate you, and they're the least informed on scientific information on fluoride. Why do we have the least informed making the decision for everybody else in the community? Simply makes no sense. Thank you, and don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions.